Our next session is called How Do We Talk About Sustainability Outside This Room? And to discuss this subject, we're going to be joined by Tonne Goodman, the fashion director of American Vogue, and Lily Cole, actress and entrepreneur. Now, obviously, the challenge is how do we communicate everything that we're hearing in this room to a broader audience? I find it quite disheartening in a way that sustainability is referred to as the S word in some quarters, which sounds quite disparaging. And I think that outlines, that kind of clarifies the challenge in a way. So I think that's where we should start with each of you. How would you address this notion how would you communicate ideas that are complicated, but also do have preconceptions attached to them? How would you start, Tonne?
Well, I think that the first thing this is the first time I've been here, which is remarkable, and I have been so kind of impressed and awed by the amount of information that I've learned. So, of course, that translates into the learning process. I think it's very important that the learning process be made totally accessible. It starts with education, I think, and the education that I got just from David Roberts' 101 was wonderful. It should be shown everywhere, I think. So I think it starts on that level, and then there's the way to make it much more kind of user-friendly for all of us, which I think is probably a social media responsibility, because social media seems to be the great communicator now and the great equalizer. So there's a responsibility there too.
I think watching David, you see the clarity, but also the entertainment value of presentation. Lily, how do you feel that is relevant, that the message needs to be simpler and you need to have that narrative element?
I don't have the answers, is my honest answer. I've been working in this space for quite a long time, and I've founded a few companies and worked with lots of companies who put kind of social responsibility or sustainability at their core. And in every instance, it's kind of been a conflict and a battle of how to communicate that, to communicate that, because there's a feeling sometimes that you can turn people off if you feel preachy or if you feel like you're trying to, present an idea that you're perfect when no company is perfect and no solution is perfect. I do feel really optimistic that over the last 10, 15 years, there's been a really kind of seismic shift in not only the industry's ability to kind of rise to this challenge, but also in consumers' interest and awareness of this issue. And I feel like we're at a tipping point where sustainability isn't, maybe I'm being naive, but I feel like it's actually becoming sexier, and it's becoming something that more people do care about and do think about, and doesn't get associated with hemp and and kind of the S word vibe. So I think, yeah, it's a branding, I guess ultimately it's a kind of branding challenge of how to, and I think we're meeting that challenge of how to make it something that's beautiful and engaging and inspiring and makes people feel good about shopping or good about reselling or good about recycling, as opposed to preached at or bored by.
Now, in our preliminary discussions, we talked about the food industry as a sort of paradigm for the way in which you launch major issues the major issues that circled around food to a new audience using personality, because personalities are a wonderful gateway or a very easy gateway a lot of the time. And the food industry created its own personalities. Amber, you're working on a project right now which involves, which actually uses that as a starting point. Mm-hmm. How important do you think it is? I hesitate to use the word celebrity, but I guess maybe that is the word that is most relevant.
Well, I think celebrity can sometimes be a tricky word when we're relating it to to messaging, because we've seen it succeed and we've also seen it fail. But what I and my business partner have kind of come up with is that it's really about a valued influencer, meaning that you find someone who represents your values and link them to your brand to speak that message. And so if we're talking about sustainability, you find authentic voices, whether it's in the sports arena or the entertainment world or in your whatever kind of business, the food industry, and you have that influencer speak to your message for you. And the other part is storytelling, which is something we're trying to do, and not just educating, but we actually want to change the way people think. And so doing, a short film that's educational, but it's entertaining and fun and fast and funny, and leaving the audience with a sense of hope, purpose, and solution. And we believe that it's vital to get the message out about sustainability in a way that makes it interesting and fun and really clear.
Amber, you have to say what it is because it's so charming.
It's a short, it's just a little short film called The Changing Room, and our idea is that if you change fashion, you change the world, and that this shopper goes into a store and she gets her items, and then she goes into the changing room, and the changing room is actually a portal into a whole new consciousness, and these celebrities and valued influencers come in through the mirror and talk to her. And so we play a little bit with the fairy tales, and we play a little bit with famous films like The Wizard of Oz and comedies like Lucille Ball Show to kind of explain these really big ideas about sustainability and give solutions. And so the shopper at the end realizes, wow, there's some great big problems, but I have solutions, and I need to slow down and think about it.
Do you think there's any risk that you run in using something that is familiar as, the notion of celebrity, that if it slots into the way people are used to seeing things offered to them, endorsed, as it were, that it makes it sort of easier to set aside? I see with food, what fascinated me about food is that somebody like Anthony Bourdain rose from the gutter, more or less, and became this global personality representing the industry, but in such a real, uncosmeticized way. The information was all his information was extremely valuable, but it was presented in this way that it was inescapable, and that was food creating its own kind of spokespeople, its own star system. Could you see that being useful in this context?
Don't you think it's harder for in this context because Anthony Bourdain had a kind of global arena that was filled with excitement and interest and nothing that was terribly tainted. And we are in a situation that does have a lot of critical factors that are not, that you don't really want to use as entertainment. So, I wish there could be. I mean, you'd think it would be a normal translation because the food, everybody now picks up anything in the supermarket and looks at the label. Everybody does it. It's the new normal. So, however we can arrive at the new normal to look at our labels on our clothes is part of the challenge, I guess.
No, Lily is an activist. That's sort of what you're engaged in. So how do you see, the way that became second nature with food? How does it become like
so
that?
So I've used food as an analogy often in my head with regards to transparency in supply chains for fashion. And I'm quite optimistic that I feel like we saw a movement happen in food not that long ago, 20 years ago, arguably, when fair trade, organic, these labeling systems became really dominant or known. We've seen that kind of slowly emerge in fashion and beauty and cosmetics. Electronics is a whole other conversation that I think there's really only a handful of companies having, but is important to have and will, I'm hopeful, happen potentially next after fashion. And I think what we can learn from food, in my opinion, is the simplicity of the messaging. So in the food industry, obviously, it's got different challenges, and in sometimes is maybe a less complex supply chain. But it's very simple, the language around food. You have fair trade, you have organic, you have kind of often the provenance of the country that the food comes from. Now maybe there's a bit more around packaging and what kind of plastics or paper is packaging, but it's all been in quite simplified certification systems. And I feel like the challenge for fashion is how to communicate really complex supply chains where you might have cotton from India that's being sewn together in Bangladesh, that's being dyed somewhere else, and then the zipper's been added in Italy. How do you communicate what fairness is and what sustainability is in a way that's really easy for the customer to understand? We did some work with my technology company looking at data mapping on companies, and we found that the more data you give, actually, the more you can kind of alienate and overwhelm a lot of people. And what we kind of honed in on is storytelling and photographs. And if you see the images of the people making the clothes, or if you see the places they come from, that seemed to be a more, as you say, entertaining, kind of engaging way for people to understand. I'm not saying that's the solution, but I think the challenge will be finding those kind of very simple and sometimes maybe like meaningful storytelling ways of connecting stories.
So really personalized storytelling then. I mean, you create characters. It's not a sort of generic tale. You actually populate the story with people that you can follow or identify with. Or...
I think you either need like really broad certification systems that make it very black and white and vanilla, you know, and I'm not saying that's achievable, but it's either like this is a good product and this is a bad product according to these certification bodies, or it is about storytelling, and that's more of a kind of subjective brand-led thing where they create ways of helping a consumer understand the efforts they've gone to in their supply chain to have a positive impact.
I'm curious to get back to the role of social media, how that is being used, not being used, how it could be more successfully employed. When you have people with Instagram followings that are bigger than the populations of a lot of countries in the world, you can imagine mobilizing the power that would lie in mobilizing those people, or is there power in those sort of slightly passive, like...
Why isn't there power, is the question. Because it should be a no-brainer. I mean, the social media platform should be being used now to encourage the things that we believe in. And I think that it's becoming a very emotional concept for people. It was, somebody earlier said that, people are concerned and, value what they put in their body. Now they have to value what they put on their body. And it seems to be, I don't know why more of the celebrities don't just plug right into this. And they don't have to do it in a very, obvious way. They can just have it be part of what their personality stands for.
Amber, do you have anything to...
I think that a lot of people don't really know this issue. You'd be surprised, even within the fashion industry, a lot of people don't know that fashion is the second dirtiest industry in the world. And it's shocking to think that they don't know, but they just don't know. We're not talking about this enough because there's a lot of perfectionistic paralysis within companies and brands to speak to even just little things they're doing. They're scared to come out of the shadows and say, we're doing this because if they're not doing enough, they're afraid that they're going to get some sort of backlash. And I think that's it's really sad that we're doing that to ourselves. We're hurting our own selves by being very black and white because we're in the gray right now and we have to move forward. So small steps take us there. And to that, the endless amount of storytelling that's possible with all of the brands and all of the companies telling different stories, whether they're entertaining, like what we're hoping to do, which is a much broader consumer awareness idea, to the smaller stories with brands talking about, the new fabric that they're developing, or, everything. There's endless amounts of content to be put on social media, and that's why we're hoping to engage some of these celebrities for this little project to hopefully excite the consumer, but educate the businesses and the brands and the fashion industry itself, and use the power of social media for something really, really positive.
I think walking around the innovation forum here, where you see what's being done with, I mean, it's like fairy tale fabrics, pineapple leather and things. They just, you can see how graphically they could be communicated, how entertainingly things like that could be communicated. But I'm wondering, you say that maybe the industry isn't aggressive enough in the people who are aware maybe aren't aggressive enough. I'm wondering if there's ways to subvert the conventional channels of communication in fashion to make, because subversion, I mean, the word disruption is more commonly used, but subversion I like because it feels a bit more revolutionary, and I think we're looking at a revolution happening. And revolutions tend to be quite sexy things, you know, in the grand scheme of things. Do you think, like for example, with your magazine, that there's ways to subvert communication to make this message in a more immediate, dynamic, and irresistible way, and then that rolls on into the relevance in people's lives when they go beyond that?
I think it's a huge challenge. I think especially with what's happening with the magazine industry today, it will probably translate much easily onto the .com platform, Vogue.com. I mean, I'm hoping that I can encourage Vogue.com to take this up a little bit more. After being at this forum, it's certainly something that should be addressed wherever we can do it. Something just occurred to me when Amber was talking, which was, you know, if you go back to education, when you think of some of the films that have been made for children, specifically something like WALL-E, did you ever see that film? I mean, it addresses the environmental stage that the you know, and it teaches it to children, and, you know, that's not sexy. It's not, this is not the sexy element of it, but it's the educational factor has got to be in there. People cannot make decisions and, you know, powerful decisions for their lives and for their children's lives unless they have the information. So it's a way of getting the information. The other thing I just wanted to mention was that going back to the brands, one of the big tools that brands use is marketing and, you know, advertising. And if, you know, there's such a huge opportunity for a brand to exploit a goodness and have it come back to them. I mean, I had a lunch with someone who works at Amazon, and we were just talking about, you know, things. And I believe that there is a company in Long Island that is making cardboard out of mushrooms. And the two of us sat there and we thought, why doesn't Amazon buy that factory? Why don't they just take it over and franchise it all over the country? And it would be the best PR for them, because one of their big notable things is the package that everything is sent to you by Amazon. So,
and never mind the fact that cardboard made out of mushrooms just sounds so incredible. Again, like another one of those fairy tale things.
And it's right there in Long Island. It's not like, we're not talking about an exotic, we're talking about
the Magic Kingdom of Long Island.
Yeah, the Magic Kingdom, exactly.
I'm fascinated by this idea that, well, I'm not fascinated, I'm slightly disconcerted by this idea that there is a huge opportunity to communicate in really direct, entertaining ways that people are receptive to, that is being missed. And I'm wondering why it's being missed.
Maybe I'm not answering your question, sorry, but I feel like there's an elephant in the room too, which is forgetting that so many of the business models of companies in fashion are dependent on selling, and dependent on selling a certain amount every year, and that has to be an increasing amount normally every year. And I think a really important part of the conversation is not just how do businesses like Stella McCartney, who I love, you know, and how do more companies shift towards renewable materials and pineapple leather and all of the kind of interesting things that are being made in that space. But also, how do we innovate on the business models itself so that we, basically, if we're talking about, I guess the point is, if we're talking about how we communicate to consumers, I think for so long now we've just been relentlessly communicating to consumers the need to buy more, the need to change your look every 5 minutes, the need to... I remember when I used to be going to, events more and red carpets more, it was like quite a shocking thing if I wore the same dress twice, because you could be called out on that in a magazine. And how do we shift those kind of cultural messages that we're sending and make sure that we're communicating kind of healthier messages around the longevity of clothes, the need to love and respect what you buy, and just try and move a little bit against that kind of relentless drive to push sales.
Do all of you see an appetite for information in your various jobs in a sort of generational way, that the younger the audience, the more hungry they are for real, enlightened information? Have you come across that at all?
I'm not sure, to tell you the truth.
I just think Adwa Aboa, who's a very interesting activist in fashion, she's pinning her hopes on the 13 and 14-year-olds. She's kind of lost faith in the 20-year-olds.
There's a lot of data to show that younger generations do care more about the impact of brands and the kind of the meaningful impact that they have, and also the movement towards sharing and access rather than ownership. So the kind of sharing economy, rental economy, and how that has, we've already seen the huge effects in our lifestyle choices, from Airbnb to cars, and how that may affect fashion and is affecting our ownership of fashion.
It's a sort of social circularity then. Actually, I can't believe that we're out of time. Out of time. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tonne.
Thank you.
Thank
Lily.
you.
Amber.
Thank you very much.